I wore white to marry the love of my life at 4 p.m. By midnight, I was wearing his blood. They say grief is a journey, but for me, it was a high-speed collision with a life I never actually knew. My husband didn't just die. He evaporated into a lie. The champagne was still cold when the world went black. My wedding to Thomas Sterling was supposed to be the social event of the season in our small, affluent corner of Connecticut. We had been together for 3 years, 3 years of effortless romance, weekend trips to Vermont, and the kind of stability I had craved my entire life. Thomas was an architect, a man of blueprints and precision. He was steady. He was safe. Or so I thought. The reception at the Oakwood estate was breathtaking. I remember the smell of peonies and the way the fairy lights caught the gold in Thomas's eyes as we danced to At Last. My mother, Lydia, was weeping with joy, and Thomas's best man, Caleb Miller, gave a toast that praised Thomas as the most honest man I've ever known. We left the party around 11:30 p.m. We were staying at a boutique hotel nearby before catching a flight to Greece the next morning. Thomas was driving his vintage Porsche, the one he'd restored himself. He was humming along to the radio, his hand resting firmly on my thigh. "Are you happy, Sienna?" he asked, glancing at me. "Beyond," I whispered. Then came the headlights. A black SUV swerved into our lane on the winding back roads. Thomas reacted instantly, jerking the wheel to the right. We didn't hit the other car. Instead, we clipped a stone guardrail, the car spinning wildly before slamming into a massive oak tree. The silence that followed was louder than the crash. I was gasping, the scent of burnt rubber and deployed airbags filling my lungs. My side of the car was relatively intact, but the driver's side had taken the brunt of the impact. "Thomas?" I choked out. He didn't move. His head was slumped against the window. There was no blood at first, just an eerie, unnatural stillness. I reached out to touch his shoulder, and that's when I felt the warmth soaking through his tuxedo jacket. "Thomas, please!" I managed to kick my door open, falling onto the wet grass in my Vera Wang gown, the silk tearing beneath me. I scrambled to his side, screaming for help, but the road was deserted. I pulled at the door handle until my fingernails bled. When I finally looked through the shattered glass, I saw his eyes. They were open, staring at nothing, reflecting the red glow of the taillights. He was gone. Before our marriage had even reached its first sunrise, I was a widow. The next 48 hours were a blur of police sirens, sterile hospital corridors, and the suffocating smell of funeral lilies. Detective Harrison Reed was kind, but his questions felt like sandpaper on raw skin. Was Thomas stressed, Mrs. Sterling? Did he have any enemies? Why was he carrying 3 different cell phones in the glove box? I stared at the detective, my mind sluggish from the sedatives. 3 phones. No, he had one. His work iPhone. "We found 3, Sienna," Detective Reed said gently, "and a briefcase in the trunk containing $50,000 in cash." I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. Thomas didn't carry cash. He used credit cards for the points. He was a man of digital footprints and paper trails. "There must be a mistake," I whispered. "He was an architect. Maybe it was for a contractor." But the look in the detective's eyes told me he didn't believe that. And deep down, neither did I. The funeral was held on a Tuesday. The sky was a bruised purple, matching my internal landscape. Caleb, the best man, stood by my side the entire time, his face a mask of stoic grief. But I noticed his hands were shaking. I chalked it up to losing his best friend. After the burial, we gathered at the Sterling family home. Thomas's parents had passed years ago, so the house felt like a mausoleum. I was sitting in the library, staring at a photo of us in Italy, when a woman I didn't recognize walked in. She was older, perhaps in her late 50s, dressed in a sharp navy suit that looked like it cost more than my car. She didn't look like a mourner. She looked like an auditor. "You must be Sienna," she said, her voice like cracking ice. "I am. I'm sorry. Did you know Thomas from the firm?" She let out a short, bitter laugh. "I'm Eleanor Vance. No, wait. You weren't supposed to hear that name. Let's just say I'm a representative of the estate Thomas actually worked for." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What are you talking about? Thomas was a partner at Miller and Sterling." "Caleb Miller's firm is a front, honey," Eleanor said, stepping closer. She leaned down, her breath smelling of peppermint and something metallic. Thomas wasn't an architect of buildings. He was an architect of identities. He spent the last 10 years scrubbing the digital histories of some very dangerous people, and it seems he left a few loose ends before he tried to retire with you. She dropped a small encrypted USB drive into my lap. The police missed this. It was taped to the underside of his desk. "You have 48 hours to give me the password, or the people Thomas was hiding from will come looking for it, and they won't be as polite as I am." She turned and vanished before I could even find my voice. I spent the next 3 days locked in Thomas's home office, a room I realized I had rarely entered. It always felt like his private sanctuary. Now it felt like a crime scene. I tried every password I could think of: our anniversary, the name of his childhood dog, the coordinates of the place he proposed. Nothing worked. On the 4th night, I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by Thomas's old journals, when I found a hidden compartment in his desk chair. Inside was a single photograph. It wasn't of me. It wasn't of his parents. It was a photo of Thomas standing next to a woman who looked exactly like me. Same blonde hair, same slight gap in her front teeth, standing in front of a sign that read, "Welcome to Blackwood Heights." On the back, in Thomas's precise architectural script, were the words, "The First Sienna, June 2018. I went cold. June 2018? I didn't meet Thomas until 2022. I looked closer at the photo. The woman was wearing a necklace, a vintage gold locket. I reached up to my own neck and touched the locket Thomas had given me on our first anniversary. It was identical. I wasn't his wife. I was his replacement. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My entire relationship hadn't been a romance. It had been a reenactment. But who was the first Sienna? And why did Thomas need a second one? I plugged the USB back into my laptop, my fingers trembling. I looked at the photo again. Blackwood Heights. I typed the name of the town into the password prompt. Access denied. I tried the date. June 20th, 2018. Access denied. Then I looked at the woman's face in the photo. She looked terrified. I zoomed in on her hand. She was holding up 3 fingers, hidden against her leg. I typed, 3 Siennas. The screen flickered, and the drive opened. Files flooded the screen, hundreds of them. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, forged passports, and surveillance photos. But the folder at the very top was labeled with my name. I clicked it. Inside were photos of me from before I ever met Thomas. Photos of me at the grocery store, at my job at the library, at my father's funeral. He had been watching me for 18 months before he ever accidentally spilled coffee on me at that bistro in Soho. But it was the last file in the folder that broke me. It was an audio recording, dated the night before our wedding. I pressed play. "It's done, Caleb," Thomas's voice rang out, clear and chillingly calm. Sienna is perfect. The transition will happen after the honeymoon. Once we're in Greece, the accident happens. Sienna Sterling dies, and Indigo Jenkins is born. We get the inheritance, and I'm out for good. And the other one? Caleb's voice asked. The one in the basement. She's becoming a liability, Thomas replied. Dispose of her tonight, while I'm at the rehearsal dinner. The recording ended. I sat in the dark, the silence of the house, now feeling predatory. Thomas hadn't died in a random accident. He was supposed to kill me. And according to that tape, there was someone else still alive in this house. The floorboards groaned above me, a long, low protest that seemed to echo through the hollow marrow of the house. I stood frozen in the center of the office, the glow of the laptop screen casting a ghostly blue light over my skin. The one in the basement. The phrase looped in my mind like a warped record. Thomas had built this house from the ground up. He had obsessed over every joist, every beam, and every architectural flourish. At the time, I thought it was the passion of a craftsman building a sanctuary for his bride. Now, looking at the encrypted files and the surveillance photos of myself, I realized he hadn't built a home. He had built a high-tech panopticon. He was a man who specialized in disappearing people, and there was no better place to hide a secret than behind a wall you designed yourself. I grabbed a heavy brass letter opener from the desk, a pathetic weapon, but the only one I had, and moved toward the kitchen. My heart was a frantic bird, trapped in a cage of ribs, beating so hard I could feel the pulse in my fingertips. I reached the heavy oak door near the pantry that led to the lower level. I had been down there a dozen times, to swap out seasonal clothes, to grab a bottle of Chardonnay from the climate-controlled rack, or to do the mundane laundry of a happy wife. But I had never looked, really looked, at the geometry of the space. I descended the stairs, the air growing colder with every step, smelling of fresh paint and expensive sealant. The main basement was exactly as I remembered, pristine, organized, and clinical. But as I walked toward the back wall where Thomas kept his oversized flat-stock files for his blueprints, something clicked in my mind. Thomas was a man of mathematical perfection. He loathed wasted space. Yet from the outside, the stone foundation of the house extended nearly 10 feet past the line of the kitchen. From the inside, the basement ended abruptly at a wall of decorative stonework. There were 10 feet of unaccounted-for space. I began tearing at the heavy shelving units, knocking over boxes of wedding gifts we hadn't even opened yet. Behind a stack of drywall sheets and a heavy velvet curtain used for light dampening, I found it. A small, brushed steel keypad. It was discreet, tucked into the shadow of a support beam. My mind raced. I tried our wedding date. Access denied. I tried his birthday. Access denied. Then I looked at the letter opener in my hand and remembered how Thomas used to talk about the moment of inception. I thought about the day he first approached me in that Soho bistro, the day he decided I was the perfect piece to fit his puzzle. I typed in the date of our first meeting, 11/14. The wall didn't swing open with a theatrical flourish. Instead, there was a sharp, pressurized hiss, the sound of a vacuum seal breaking. A narrow segment of the stonework slid back an inch and then glided to the side on silent, lubricated tracks. I stepped into the gap, my breath hitching in my throat. The room inside was a jarring contrast to the cold concrete of the basement. It was a high-end suite, decorated in soft grays and creams, lit by recessed LED strips that mimicked natural sunlight. It was beautiful, expensive, and utterly windowless. And there, sitting on the edge of a pristine white bed, was the woman from the photograph. She looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of raw terror and a heart-breaking, fragile hope. She was thinner than in the photo I'd found in the desk, her skin sallow from months, perhaps years of artificial light. Her hair was the same shade as mine, cut in the exact same shoulder-length bob I had sported when Thomas and I first met. Are you the new one?" she whispered. Her voice was raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "I'm Sienna," I said, my voice shaking so violently I could barely stand. "Who are you? What is this place?" "I'm Claire," she said, standing up unsteadily, her legs trembling beneath a simple linen shift. But he called me Sienna. He's been calling me Sienna for 2 years. He said it was my new name. He said the old me was dead. She took a tentative step toward me, her eyes searching my face, as if looking for a reflection. Where is he? Why hasn't he brought the evening meal? He's never late. He says precision is the hallmark of a gentleman. "Thomas is dead, Claire," I said, the words feeling heavy and strange in the air. "He died in a car accident on our wedding night, a week ago." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat back down on the bed and let out a long, shuddering breath that sounded like a soul finally admitting defeat. "Then we're both dead," she said flatly. "If he's dead, Caleb Miller will come to clean up the evidence. And we are the evidence." I moved toward her, dropping the letter opener and taking her cold, thin hands in mine. "Who is Caleb really? And why did Thomas do this to you?" She explained it then, the horrific, clinical truth of the Sterling architecture. Thomas Sterling didn't just design buildings. He was a master of the identity pivot. He worked for a shadow network of the ultra-wealthy, people who needed to disappear or people who needed to reappear as someone else. He would find women who were isolated, orphans, women with no family, or women like me who had recently suffered a loss, and he would groom them. I was being prepped to become a Swedish heiress, Claire whispered, her eyes darting to the corners of the room. The real woman was killed in a skiing accident that was never reported. Thomas spent 18 months teaching me her history, her accent, her mannerisms. I was supposed to take her place so her husband could keep her trust fund. But then, I failed a test. I couldn't get the accent right under pressure. So he brought me here. And then he found you. The $50,000 in the Porsche, the 3 cell phones, the business trips to Europe. It all fell into place with a sickening thud. I wasn't his wife. I was his latest identity pivot. I was being prepped to replace some woman whose life was about to be snuffed out, and once the transition was complete, the Sienna I thought I was would have died in a tragic accident, leaving Thomas with a new identity and a fresh bank account. He told me he loved me, I choked out, a final pathetic spark of denial flickering in my chest. He loved the project, Claire said, her voice gaining a sharp edge of bitterness. He loved the control. Look at the vanity, Sienna. I walked to the dresser. It was filled with the exact same makeup I used, the same perfume, bergamot and sea salt, the same skincare routine. He hadn't been learning my preferences over the last 3 years. He had been dictating them. He had sculpted my life until I was a perfect, interchangeable part in a global machine of fraud and murder. "We have to leave," I said, the rage finally beginning to overtake the shock. "We have to go to the police. Detective Reed is already suspicious." "We can't," Claire said, pointing to a small, nearly invisible black dome in the corner of the ceiling. A tiny red light blinked rhythmically. "Caleb Miller isn't just a best man. He's the closer. He handles the logistics that Thomas was too refined for. If the red light is blinking, It means the feed is live. He knows you're in here. He knows I'm still alive. As if the house itself were responding to her words, a heavy thud echoed from the floor above. The front door. I looked at Claire. She was terrified, a bird waiting for the cat. But I looked at my own reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman Thomas had spent 3 years crafting into a submissive, grieving widow. I realized then that he had made one fatal mistake in his architecture. He had built me to be strong. He had built me to be resilient. And he had given me the keys to his kingdom. "Hide," I whispered, shoving her back toward the hidden room. I'm going to show Caleb Miller that his architect forgot to check the structural integrity of this house. I didn't have time to be a victim. The grief that had been suffocating me for a week, the heavy, cloying sorrow of a widow, hardened in an instant into a cold, sharp diamond of rage. Thomas hadn't loved me. He hadn't even seen me. He had been a predator, a sculptor of human clay, and I was just the latest statue he'd carved to fit a dead woman's mold. And now, Caleb Miller was the scavenger coming to smash the gallery. "Hide," I hissed to Claire, shoving her back into the recessed room. My voice was a whip crack, startling even myself. "Do not make a sound until I call for you. If you hear a gunshot, run for the stairs and don't look back." I closed the panel. To the untrained eye, it looked like a solid wall of masonry. I stood in the center of the basement, my mind racing through the blueprints of my own survival. I wasn't an architect, but I had spent 3 years living with one. I knew how he thought. He valued aesthetics over utility. He loved shadows and hidden angles. I grabbed a heavy glass gallon of industrial bleach from the laundry shelf. My hands were steady. The panic that should have been there was replaced by a strange, clinical detachment. I turned off the basement lights, plunging the cavernous space into a thick, suffocating velvet. I retreated into the shadows behind the massive steel furnace, the heart of the house that was currently pumping warmth into a crime scene. The heavy front door upstairs slammed with a finality that made the floor joists groan. Then came the footsteps. Not the measured, graceful, melodic steps of Thomas, but the hurried, aggressive stomp of Caleb Miller. He wasn't pretending to be the grieving best man anymore. "Sienna," he called out. His voice was taut, vibrating with a jagged edge of desperation. "I know you're down here. Eleanor told me she talked to you. She's a professional, Sienna, but I'm not. I don't have her patience." He reached the top of the basement stairs. The beam of a high-powered tactical flashlight sliced through the dark, a white blade of light that flickered across the washer, the dryer, and the shelves of detergent. "You shouldn't have opened that drive," Caleb shouted as he descended the wooden steps, which creaked under his weight. "It wasn't meant for you. It was Thomas's insurance policy. He was a genius, but he was a fool for the aesthetic." He started believing his own lies. He thought he could actually keep you, that he could retire and play house in Connecticut while the people he owed identities to were still waiting. I held my breath, the scent of dust and old concrete filling my nose. I could see his silhouette now, framed by the light of his own flash. In his right hand, he held a suppressed pistol, long, lean, and terrifyingly silent. Thomas was getting weak, Caleb continued, his voice bouncing off the concrete walls. He fell for the replacement he created. He was supposed to stage the accident in Greece, Sienna, a tragic drowning, a grieving husband returning home with a massive insurance payout and a clean slate. But he started talking about actually staying married. He was going to jeopardize the entire operation for a fantasy. He was going to let you live as you. I felt a fresh wave of nausea. The black SUV on the wedding night, the way it had targeted the driver's side. "You killed him," I whispered from the darkness, my voice a ghost among the machinery. Caleb spun toward the sound, the flashlight beam swinging wildly like a searchlight. "I saved the business." Thomas was a master of the craft, but he got sentimental. Sentiment is a terminal illness in our line of work. "Now where is the drive, Sienna? Give it to me, and maybe I'll make your disappearance quick. I'll tell everyone you couldn't handle the grief. A tragic suicide. It fits the narrative." He stepped closer to the furnace, his shoes crunching on a bit of stray gravel. I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead. He wasn't a cold-blooded assassin. He was a man drowning in his own greed, trying to catch his breath. When he was only 3 feet away, his flashlight beam inches from my hiding spot, I acted. I didn't scream. I didn't hesitate. I threw the heavy glass bleach bottle with every ounce of strength I had, aiming for the concrete floor at his feet. The glass shattered with an explosive crack. The pungent, stinging fumes of concentrated bleach erupted into the air, a chemical cloud that filled the small space instantly. Caleb let out a strangled gasp, his eyes watering and burning as the vapors hit his mucous membranes. He instinctively reached up to wipe his face, his aim faltering, the gun arm dropping. I lunged. I didn't use the brass letter opener I had tucked in my waistband. I used the momentum of my entire body. I tackled him, my shoulder driving into his gut, forcing him backward. We hit the sharp, unforgiving corner of the steel furnace with a sickening thud. The gun clattered across the floor, sliding into the darkness. Caleb groaned, the air whistling out of his lungs, his head lolling against the metal. He tried to swing at me, a clumsy, blind blow, but I was faster. I grabbed his hair and slammed his head back against the furnace one more time. He went limp, sliding down the side of the machine like a discarded rag doll. I scrambled for the gun, my fingers searching the cold floor until they closed around the textured grip. I stood over him, gasping for air that tasted like bleach and adrenaline. "Claire!" I shouted. "Claire, come out!" The panel slid open. Claire stepped out, her eyes wide as she took in the scene, the man who had helped keep her in a cage, now broken on the floor. "Get my phone," I told her, my voice low and steady, the gun still pointed at Caleb's chest. "It's on the laundry table. Call Detective Harrison Reed. Tell him the widow has the best man held at gunpoint. Tell him to bring a forensics team. Tell him I found the blueprints." The aftermath was a hurricane of blue and red lights. Caleb Miller didn't just confess, he disintegrated. To avoid the needle, he traded every secret Thomas Sterling had ever kept. He led the FBI to 3 other custom-built homes across the tri-state area. In a basement in New Jersey, they found a girl named Mia, who had been missing for 6 months. In a subfloor in Rhode Island, they found the remains of a woman Thomas had retired 5 years ago. The first Sienna, whose name was actually Indigo, was found buried beneath the gazebo of the Sterling family estate. Thomas had built his life on top of her, literally. The media called me a hero, the vigilante bride. They focused on the drama, the wedding dress stained with bleach and basement dust. But they didn't see the real work. I sold every asset associated with the Sterling name, the house, the cars, the offshore accounts Caleb revealed. I didn't keep a cent of the blood money. Instead, I bought a small, nondescript office in the city. No hidden rooms, no secret panels. Claire lives with me now, though she's reclaimed her real name. We spend our days working with a team of private investigators and tech specialists. We look for the ghosts, the women who fall through the cracks, the ones the architects of the world think they can replace. I still wear the gold locket sometimes, not as a memento of love, but as a reminder of the weight of a lie. Every time I look in the mirror, I don't see the woman Thomas tried to create. I see the woman who survived him. The wedding night was the end of my life as a puppet, but it was the first day I actually owned my soul. The architect is dead, and I finally learned how to build something that will never fall down. People ask me if I still love the man I thought Thomas was. The truth is, that man never existed. He was just a beautiful facade built over a hollow foundation. I lost my husband on my wedding night, but a week later, I found my life. The truth didn't just break my heart, it gave me the weapons to burn his legacy to the ground.